again here. If you have conversations to have, please take them out in the hall. Thank you. Okay. Our new action item number 1 is the consent calendar number 4. BTA 4, approval of student computer refresh to support teaching and learning and equitable access for each student district-wide. This came before CNI May 21, 4. Go ahead. Approval. Approval of this item would authorize the superintendent to execute purchase orders through RFP number 06792 with Dell Thornburg for a total not to exceed NTE amount of $12 million plus Washington State sales tax over fiscal years 2019-20, 2020-21 with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the purchase orders. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute purchase orders through RFP number 06792 with Dell Thornburg for a total not to exceed amount of $12 million plus Washington State sales tax over fiscal years 2019-20 and 2020-21 with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the purchase orders.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns from my colleagues? This came before us previously through introduction. Director Mack, you removed it from the consent calendar. Have at it.
I did. So I removed it for 2/3 reasons. One was because there was a lot of public testimony around it, so I wanted to give it an actual vote. And the other reason was getting clarity specifically around the dollars and when they're going to be spent, because the motion says $12 million over the course of the 2 years, and we are just in the process of adopting the budget for 2019-20. We haven't actually adopted that budget yet, and the 2021 doesn't even get considered or built until later on. So I wanted to understand the functionality of approving those at this time and what the timeline was. And corollary to that, the totals that are in the bar are 100 and some odd thousand less than 12 million. So I'm curious why we have a $12 million figure and not the total, which is 11,817,000. And my third question was about the comment about the Wi-Fi and connectivity issues that we have at schools and whether or not and how that is going to be addressed. So really 2 questions. One, what's the budget and how does it work over which years? Clarity, and then the Wi-Fi question.
Thank you, Director Mack. John Kroll, Chief Information Officer. I wanted to clarify, it is over 2 fiscal years. Part will be spent in this fiscal year and part will be spent next fiscal year. And I'll bring up CFO Berge to explain how that works.
Good evening, Jolyn Berge, Chief Financial Officer. So for capital projects, oftentimes capital projects will span several different years. And so what we look at is an authority to spend from the board that may cross fiscal years. And maybe that can be clarified in the bars in the future. But there is budget capacity in this year, and then we'll build it in. It's built in for 1920 as well. So the spend capacity on the breakdown has been verified by staff, so that when we sign the bar, that's part of what we're indicating, is that there is budget capacity that will be considered in both of those things. So when you approve Lincoln High School for, I don't know, however, $100 million, $200 million, and it was over several years, we had a spend plan. And if sometimes, right, so we budget conservatively to spend more quickly, and then if we don't spend all of the dollars in 18-19, we roll those dollars over to 19-20, and then when we're building the budgets for those out years, we re-rack the spend plan and make sure that we're asking for enough expenditure authority.
But for clarity, you just said 18, 19, so are the dollars going to be spent this fiscal year, or the bar says 19, 20, and then 2021? So
Nope.
just for clarity, are we spending them in this budget year? Or are we spending it? We're
It
spending
is-
it in this year and next year, not,
Yes, this year and next year.
so
So-
19, 20 would start, fiscal year would start July, is that correct? It's September 1, so the dollars aren't going to be spent until September 1. Just clarifying so that I understand which budget it's coming from.
Yeah, that's actually a typo or a Scribner's error. The money will be spent in 2019, so 2018-19 fiscal year, so this year, and then the remainder will be spent next year. So we would need to amend that motion to say 18-19 and 19-20.
Thank you so much. I'm glad I clarified that because it was concerning me. So we're going to have to reread the motion or correct it because it is actually supposed to read over fiscal years 18, 19 and 19, 20, correct?
Correct.
Acting Chief Counsel Boyd, to the podium, please give us a ruling.
Yeah, so as long as we read in what the motion should be and it's clear, we'll be fine. So just want to make it very clear.
Read it in again with the corrections, please.
I'm comfortable doing that. I want to make sure that the written record that is captured also does that, because 3 years from now, we're looking back.
Yeah, and I think we'll make sure that the board action report is redlined for the public-facing document.
And will that be then corrected and uploaded on the web tomorrow?
Correct.
Terrific, thank you.
Thank you.
Withdrawing the original motion and offering a new motion, I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute purchase orders through RFP number 06792 with Dell Thornburg for a total not to exceed amount of $12 million plus Washington State sales tax over fiscal years 2018-19 and 2019-21, 2019-20, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the purchase orders.
Second.
Other questions, comments, concerns from my colleagues?
I had the Wi-Fi question as well, and then Director Burke had a question.
Touche. Wi-Fi question, CIO Kroll.
So the Wi-Fi question, I need to do research on that, but generally we do, not generally, we do provide access to all of our schools. What we did find is that some schools that have the older computers that haven't been updated, and then if students are taking any computer instead of one that's assigned to them, and often that happens when there's a lot of sharing of the computers, what happens is the student then, if they've never had that computer, if they've just grabbed a random computer, it needs to download their personal profile onto the computer. And what happens is it appears as a Wi-Fi problem because if you have a class of, say, 30 kids who grabbed 30 random computers, it could affect the performance of the computer. So we'll look into issues with the Wi-Fi. That could be the problem, but the problem could also be the computers themselves, or the problem could be students using a computer that was not assigned to them, that they have not used before, and it's downloading that complete profile. So if you've ever noticed on your computer when you're doing like a fresh start, it takes longer.
And you've got some personal anecdotes of one of our beloved teachers right behind you. She's more than happy to talk to you about it. Director Burke.
I would like to share some of the conversation that was had at committee. On this particular item, I did not vote to approve it out of committee, and I actually will not be supporting it tonight. And so I want to be really clear about why. In committee, I had requested that we peel off the K-5 component and address that separately because there are urgent needs in our schools. I want to acknowledge that, recognize it, and say we have to deal with those urgent needs. We have to fund them. We have to get the equipment into our schools. So I'm going to start with some of the things I'm excited about. I'm excited about the one-to-one take-home program in our high schools. I'm excited about the equitable access. I'm excited about the recognition in our technology documents that the educators are critical, that the computers don't replace the educators. What I'm concerned about, that I've raised before, is that there's a lack of acknowledgement throughout our documents that there may be risks associated with technology use. This is not a completely risk-free thing. We have 3 governing documents that are referenced here: our technology plan, the Washington K-12 EdTech standards, and a document called Principles for Effective Digital Learning. Through none of them does it mention any potential development or exposure risks due to improper use of technology or non-age appropriate use of technology. It just talks about the positive elements. And so my concern is the impact on cognitive and motor development in the K-5 years. Those are the formative years for literacy, for numeracy, for hand-eye coordination. And I recognize that we need our kids to be able to operate technology and to be able to use technology as a tool. I don't like the idea of our assessments driving our technology choices. That bothers me a lot. But I'm concerned that if we put more computers, our kids are going to spend less time writing, drawing, reading, doing math, doing things with their hands, doing things with their, the elements that are part of cognitive development. And so I actually, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have some some notes out from 2016 talking about, these are some of the extremes. And I think we have to acknowledge that these may be a result of extreme use, but they are still risks. Children who overuse online media are at risk of problematic internet use. The prevalence of problematic internet use among children and adolescents is between 4 and 8%. That's in 2016. And at home, many children and teenagers use entertainment media at the same time they're engaged in other tasks such as homework. A growing body of evidence suggests that the use of media while engaged in academic tasks has negative consequences on learning. I think that this speaks to training, that we've heard from, effective use of digital technology. It's not just use, it's not just prohibited use, it is effective use, but we've not had the conversation, and it's not built into our documents, that there are risks associated with it that we have to acknowledge. The recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics for governmental organizations is to continue research into the risks and benefits of media, prioritize longitudinal and robust study designs, including new methodologies for understanding exposure and use, provide interventions reducing harmful media use and preventing and addressing harmful exposure. And then I think there's one more here. And inform educators and legislators about research findings so they can develop updated guidelines for safe and productive media use. So my point is not deny kids computers. It's that all of our structure, all of our conversations have been around the benefits, around the positives, around the strengths. That's cool. But that's a one-sided story. And so I'm just here voting no on this because I want to make sure that we are acknowledging that these benefits don't come for free, and we have to be cognizant of that.
Other comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Director DeWolf.
Yeah, I just want to reply to that because I think, research also suggests that 40% of our neighbors have no more than $400 to their name, and 50% of our neighbors are rent burdened. So I would imagine that, particularly in these conversations, we also have to recognize our privilege. And so I know a lot of my neighbors don't have any access to any of this technology at all. So I want to be thoughtful, and I appreciate you. I know we can nerd out about our data and our research. So I appreciate the conversation. I just want to be thoughtful that we often come from our place of privilege to think that that is how everybody exists, and more often than not, we have upwards of 4,000 students experiencing homelessness in our schools. I mean, many kids, many families do not have any access. So this is maybe their only time to have access. So that's where my feeling is.
Director Geary.
I was listening to your comments, Director Burke, and what I heard was a real strong concern about access to media and access to the internet. And you're focusing it on early grades, where I guess, again, I get back to the idea that this is not being put out in a silo. It is not the only tool. It is part of the package of tools that we provide to our teachers so that they can do their job. And that we hear today that they are very mindful of the impact that it's having on their students' brains and their engagement in education. So certainly I hear you, but I really heard you talk more about internet media access and not computers as a tool necessary for elementary school teachers to prepare kids to start engaging with the tool more actively around potential media learning in middle school. But if there are bodies of kids that aren't prepared to engage by middle school when they need to hit the ground running for more complex, deeper analysis, thought, bigger productions of homework, or even just schoolwork, then they will be behind. And so I appreciate it, and I think that we need to continue to work on the policies. And as we've talked about, curriculum, the balance between adopting curriculum and setting forth guidelines in terms of the amount of computer that the curriculum requires. We can address that in other areas, but the tools, I think, need to be there. And I'm going to second, I hate doing anything that is driven by a state-mandated test.
Director Burke.
Again, I want to appreciate my colleagues and the educators, and that this is not in any way, and I hope it's not perceived as a lack of trust around your area of expertise, but just the acknowledgement that we are talking about an issue from the benefits side. And to be really specific, if we imagine like speech-to-text conversion, is that going to reduce the ability of our kids to write? If we look at some of the amazing artwork that can be done on computers, are kids going to do less drawing and painting? So I only say this as worst-case scenarios. If we're doing more simulations, are our kids going to lose their numeracy skills? So those are my points of concern, and they've been raised.
Director
and they're on
Mack.
the record.
Having 3 kiddos that are young and have been growing up in a world of technology, which is different than the world that I grew up in and different from our parents' generation, that technology presentation that we went to by the gentleman that Mr. Kroll organized, it was really a fascinating conversation around how we communicate differently and the impact of technology on this generation of kids that's moving through. And it's a runaway train, really, in how we communicate, how we interact, how we learn. And I second concerns around focusing only on the benefits but not being cognizant of actually critically thinking about what are the potential dangers to our students and to our kids as they grow up, and learn through this that we're responsible to think about that, and we haven't generated a policy around those concepts and like the things that we do need to think about and put some guardrails around to support our students, not to limit it just for limited's sake, but so that we ensure that we're using technology as a tool. One of the things that we are finding that I understand is happening, and I apologize for not knowing where the quote is, but students are getting to medical school without the motor skills that they need to do surgery. There's like fewer because they're not actually, we're not doing quite as much writing, and there are impacts of what's happening in our society that we have to consider. I'm still going to support this effort to move forward, but I strongly urge the board, myself, and others that'll be continuing forward in the next year to spend the time and energy to get a policy settled that we can feel comfortable with.
Okay, follow-up, comments, and then we'll roll this to a vote. First of all, John Kroll, CIO, thank you very much. A couple of things that I really appreciate about you in pushing forward some of these resolutions is that you have brought folks, for instance, from the city of Seattle to talk about the inequities of wiredness throughout the city. That's something that if you could send that out and to all the school board members, I'd be very grateful. That was a huge learning piece for me. The ITAC committee is wrestling with these issues, and it's a diverse group of folks, and they are not afraid to disagree with each other, just like we on this dais are not afraid to disagree with each other. So thank you very much for that. I would point out that we tend to rely a lot on the tech plan and the ed specs, and I'm not sure, I appreciate that we voted on some of this in a big BEX 5 priority plan, okay? But it wasn't a specific bar. And I think you have left your flanks unprotected on some of those arguments, so you might want to fill in the holes. And again, these are really good, rich conversations to have. Your predecessor certainly did not. And I respect the heck out of you for being good and transparent on all of this. A, it's a ton of money. B, it's a whole shift of how we teach. The McClure librarian, hands up. Your testimony especially resonated with me. Your conversations on ITAC have especially resonated with me, that when you get rising sixth graders in, you know exactly which school they came from based on their abilities. And whoever taught the third graders on the SBAC, that might well be one of those video snips I send to all my legislative friends, and Betsy as well, because that's just craziness. It's not intellectually consistent that we are doing high stakes testing on slow computers, 20 minutes, bad internet, and we're penalizing our district and punitively shaming our children. I mean, anyway, I intend to vote for this, but I intend to dog you about these issues because they're important issues. And I also encourage teachers, in terms of your long-term career paths, there are those folks on one end of the continuum that believe computers will harm your jobs in the long term. And one hopes you don't let them. Roll call, please.
Director Burke,
No.
Director DeWolf,
Aye.
Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed with a vote of 5-1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now moving to action item number 2, which was number 22 on the consent agenda. BEX 5, award construction contract K5109 to Wayne's Roofing, Inc. for the Van Asselt Elementary School at the African American Academy Roof Replacement Project. Came before Ops May 16th for
Approval.
approval of this item would authorize the superintendent to execute construction contract K5109 with Wayne's Roofing, Inc. in the amount not to exceed $5,500,000, including basic bid, plus Washington State sales tax, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute construction contract K5109 with Wayne's Roofing Incorporated in the amount that is not to exceed $5,500,000, including base bid plus Washington State sales tax, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract.
Second.
Director DeWolf, I believe you were the gentleman that took this off the consent calendar. You go first.
I was the gentleman.
This time.
This time. I want to just elevate something which I think is very exciting, and I know we maybe have glossed over it today in our comments, but this morning, Executive Committee did move out a really exciting bar that, again, I was really grateful to work with President Harris, Director Burke, and Director Mack to establish a student and community workforce agreement here at Seattle Public Schools through the passage of our task force. So this really just relates to that, and also to really reiterate what is deeply important about BEX 5 and the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility we have to those public dollars. And so I do fully support this project, and obviously we should have good roofs covering all of our schools. I just want to elevate and point out the fact that this is an example of a major capital project that we actually should have under a student and community workforce agreement. If we did have a SCWA, I'm gonna have to remember that all the time, Rick, SCWA on this project, I believe we would be assured of high labor standards for the working people on the project. We would have the certainty that there would be harmony on the project and no work stoppages, which keeps us fiscally responsible and projects completed on time, and we would help ensure that a good number of the people working on the project are from our local community. So I'm really excited, again, that we as a board will have before us in the coming weeks ability to move forward on the Student and Community Workforce Agreement Task Force that achieves these goals eventually. So I just wanted to express a sense of accountability and urgency that the longer we wait on CWA for these types of projects, the more we miss out on the benefits of a CWA, and the more the opportunities we miss out to connect our own SPS community students and taxpayers to those job opportunities.
So let me ask you a question back, if I might. How did you choose consent item number 22 to hang that speech on, as opposed to
Because it was in
20,
consent.
21,
It was in consent.
23? Well, there are many operations construction projects in consent. I'm just trying to determine whether Wayne's Roofing is special as opposed to any other ops
No,
project.
it was just an opportunity to say, it's really easy for us to put these things on consent agenda, obviously, which is what we do to keep kind of the efficiency of our meetings. And here I am talking for very long, so I'm trying to reduce the talking time. But I will say, as part of consent, it's important to keep, just elevate and for the accountability. And so that was all it was. And the comment rings true for the next BEX 5 conversations we'll have in the future.
And I admire your facility and nimbleness. Are there any particular questions, comments, or concerns for Wayne's Roofing? Director Burke, please.
I had thought the reason this was pulled off was because it was a BEX 5 item, and that it was an amount that was above, up into the millions of dollars, which for some of these types of agreements, often there's a threshold. So what that triggered for me is I didn't think we were funded for BEX 5 until next year.
That's
and
true.
so I'm curious, is my misunderstanding that we're not collecting, or how are we funding this out of BEX 5?
That's true. Fred Podesta, Chief Operations Officer. So we're authorized to actually directly spend BEX $5 with the start of the fiscal year in September. If there are actual expenditures out the door, we will book those to contingency funds in BTA 3, and then we'll do a transfer after September 1st. And this project got fast-tracked. I think I mentioned to you last time that we've got some structural issues with the roof. We found out the hard way when somebody stepped through it. The piece of abstract art I brought in is a piece of what needs to be replaced. So I appreciate...
Can you hold that up, please?
Actually, bring it forward so that everybody sees.
This is the tetanus waiting to happen.
So it goes on TV. That's it. Yeah, you're there.
Did we pay a DLI claim on this one?
No, we did not.
Thank you for that. Okay.
But I appreciate the board moving quickly because this needs to be taken care of. Parts of this needs to happen this summer.
Okay, so here's the next question. You know it's coming. If we didn't see that one, what other happy little surprises are out there waiting for us?
So we've changed our practices and to have roof consultants, on building envelope consultants. You always ask about this term, the exterior building on design. This is really a design issue that has led to this accelerated damage, and so we approach this work differently now.
Okay. Seeing no other further comments, questions, concerns, roll call, please.
Director Burke,
Aye.
Director DeWolf,
Aye.
Director Geary, Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
Okay. C1, approval of the 2019-2020 student rights and responsibilities. Came before CNI May 21, 4. 4, approval. Approval of this item would accept the 2019-20 student rights and responsibilities document as attached to the board action report. And be advised that page 38 of this clean copy was updated since introduction. We had a rather rowdy and thoughtful conversation during introduction. Do we have any other comments, questions, concerns? Director
Motion?
Burke, motion.
I move that the board approve the 2019-20 Student Rights and Responsibilities document as attached to the board action report.
Second.
Comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? I'm sorry? I did, and you were otherwise occupied, so we read it out loud. Not again, relax.
It's a hot
Director
day and
Mack,
I'm getting tired
please.
again. My question was relative to the questions that came up earlier about language that was changed between the two drafts and just clarity around what's in the final draft. Just for the record, kind of explaining, do I need to go further into what the testimony was? Okay, you've got it, so thank you.
You got quite a look on your face, pal. What up?
Good evening, Wyatt Jesse, Chief of Student Support Services. This is just this particular, on that comment, the red line version that you have in front of you is the official record. It does actually read on there, it was a comment around that staff also hold that commitment, not just the district, around supporting students of color furthest from educational justice. And so that comment is in there. It reads like that. The current version that is online would be updated, so that's why we're waiting for board action this evening to approve that, and so then we can update online, the online version, including the PDFs right now. So we're just waiting for that action. So we're teed up very well to continue to read what was in the initial version, as you know.
Can you do me a favor and read for the record what is actually in the version that we're posting, that it does retain that language? Because it sounded to me like it was being lost, and so.
So it's really in specific to, sorry, this thing's not labeled for pages.
Page 6.
So it's under the district, commitments, and then specifically to the section titled Seattle School Staff Are Committed To, and that is ensuring racial equity in an educational system. Then it goes on to other sections that are listed in there, and so that was the real clause that was under discussion, that again, it's Seattle Public Schools staff are committed to, and then also the ensuring racial equity in educational system. Those two pieces are not currently on the online version. Again, we're waiting for board action. And then it goes on to talk about unapologetically addressing the needs of students of color who are furthest from educational justice, require safe learning environments, and it just goes on into the clause. So that's what I wanted to highlight.
Other comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Director Burke,
Aye.
Director DeWolf,
Aye.
Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
Action C, number 2, approve purchase of technology to support the career and technical education, CTE program, came before CNI May 21, 4. Approval of this item would authorize the superintendent to execute purchase orders in an amount not to exceed $750,000 inclusive of Washington state sales tax over the fiscal year 2018-19, summarized in a list of projected orders attached to the board action report with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute purchase orders in the amount not to exceed $750,000 inclusive of Washington state sales tax over fiscal year 2018-2019, summarized in the list of projected orders attached to the board action report with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns from my colleagues? We had a good discussion during introduction last time. Director Burke.
Brief comment just to thank staff for this and to also emphasize that this work aligns with the CTE plan, which was in the consent agenda previously approved, and I just want to elevate that so that folks know it's there.
Other comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Director Burke,
Aye.
Director DeWolf,
Aye.
Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
C3, McGilvra Parent-Teacher Association grant to fund multi-tiered systems of support for the 2019-20 school year. This came before A&F, May 24.
Approval.
Thank you. Approval of this item would authorize the superintendent to accept the McGilvra PTA grant of $348,705 for the 2019-20 school year. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to accept the McGilvra PTA grant of $348,705 for 2019-20 school year.
Second.
Comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Director Burke.
I'll
Yeah,
start.
so-
I think this is a hotbed issue, and I want to acknowledge that. I think that we as a board and we as a district are leaning into it. And this is a place where I think there's a component of values and there's a component of timing. And it's important, in my mind, that we don't conflate them. I believe there's a shift going on, and I believe that that shift is around more equitable processes through out-of-district fundraising mechanisms. I'm not even going to single out PTA, but awareness of that, documenting that, communicating to our families around the importance of that. The other side of that is what we're doing within the district, which is we are unapologetic about having our funding flow prioritized towards schools of need. And those two things are working in opposition. There's the community funding sources are typically more affluent schools, and the internal funding are typically we're providing our funding to the schools that have a greater need, more students, farther from educational justice. So that polarity, I think, is something that we continue to talk about, to work through, and this item that's before us today is sort of a manifestation of that. Like, well, we have had our community that has historically raised money, which has historically been able to be used in their schools, is here before us today. At the same time, we're trying to make a transition to more equitable funding models. And I truly believe that our families, by and large, support that shift. But there's a risk, if we don't approve this, that we could be sending the message to our families, sorry, your money's not welcome here, sorry, your partnership isn't welcome here, sorry, we haven't figured out how to do this yet, which is kind of, I believe, is the message that I'm feeling, is that we haven't gotten there yet. So I will be supporting this because I think we're on a trajectory that in the future, this is not going to become an issue. But today it is, and I'd like to think that while we may support this today, that in doing so, we're bringing these families along with us on the journey to help find a way to balance that out.
Director DeWolf.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Gosh. Well, thank you, President Harris, for seeing me. I have elevated this this frustrating issue at least 4 times. I know that sounds trivial, but at least on the record to say that I think actually the responsibility is at the feet of this board to actually do something to address this through policy, and we have not done that. So I want to tell you how conflicted I am about this this item. Particularly as it relates and pertains to equity and funding and also, again, the movement that is coming along already around this work. I think it would my fear is that if we don't have anything in policy that is preventing this, then it's up to us to do the work to make the policy. So I think today, if this moves forward, then tomorrow, I hope and expect to see an email from one of you, if not myself, to say, okay, what are we going to do to bring back the folks from McGilvra, but also other communities. I know there's folks in West Seattle. I have my friend Hayden Bass out there. Like, there are really folks that are trying to talk about equity and PTA funding models. I think it behooves us to say, this is our, this is the, I don't know anything about sports really, shot clock maybe? Like, this is our countdown, right? This is our countdown. And it's up to us to do something about it. So I hope in the fall we can bring back these families to say, come along with us. We need to reassess this because, even on the campaign, I know Eden and I talked about this a lot. And I didn't realize that there really technically is a loophole that is not really preventing this from happening. And so it is up to us, I think, to make that commitment to do something about it. And I'm ready to do that. And I think a lot of families and communities are ready for us to make that decision and look to us for the leadership on that. And I would be glad to support that and whatever the work it takes to get there. But I think for now, I want to be thoughtful that there are, not even likely, but we know statistically that there are students experiencing homelessness at McGilvra. There are students that need additional supports and services and resources who are underserved. And so I don't want to cause harm in the short term without actually having done the work to make sure that this is prevented in the future. So that's just what I'm sitting with, and it's just, that's the tension I'm sitting with.
Director Mack.
So I appreciate talking about not causing harm. I am thinking about if for some reason we were to vote this down, it would be akin at this moment in time to the levy cap that the legislature put forward. It doesn't force the actual funding that's needed and the supports that's needed into the schools, but it restricts our ability to provide it. And that causes harm. That will cause harm to the students in the school. The work has been moving forward in terms of doing the actual analysis around the fact that the funding model is, because we are fundamentally underfunded, we have this system of all of these different streams of money coming in from all different sorts of places, and that creates a fundamental inequity when it's happenstance as to how it's getting applied. We have foundation monies, and I want to actually pull everyone's attention to some data and information that helps tell the story of what is actually going on in our district on a school-by-school basis, and it's the big sheet. It was presented in the May 20th Audit and Finance. You can get a copy of it if you call the board office. The amount, it's a very complex thing, but the total amount for other funding, which is all grants, so that includes Title I dollars, LAP dollars, which are additional state dollars that are directed towards learning assistance. Our city FEL levy, or FEP levy now, so that's all the money that the city has raised in a levy for us and comes into our schools and pays for staff. Let's be honest, we're supporting the staff in the buildings. PTA, and then other grants. These are all columns in here. And then central grants, and then self-help. So we have 7 different categories of other that the state's not covering, that's not under our levy. And the PTA dollars are only 8% of that. For specifically PTA, 33.7 million is the total extra dollars for last year. 8% of that, 2.7, is the PTA dollars. The other grants and foundations that we're very grateful for as well, that are bringing in dollars to our schools, like LEV and Neshholm and all of these different school funding sources, account for 12%. The city levy accounts for 32%. So we have a donut hole situation in the way that this is set up when our WSS can't fully fund the schools at the level that basic education should be, because the state's not providing us the dollars. They're giving us 9 nurses for 105 schools. We can debate that. But we are not getting enough funding, and we are intentionally focusing on equity in the distribution internally. We have multiple ways in which that happens, which we can talk about further. But we are putting dollars in our highest needs schools at a triple to 3 times rate that other schools are getting. And those other schools are not getting the full-time counselor, and they're not getting the math assistants. And these are all things that are actually really helpful for the entire school. So at this point in time, we still need the support. And there are other schools that need additional support, and it's not fair. The reality with this grant is that it brings McGilvra's funding per student into the middle of the pack. It is not up at the top. It is not outrageous, and it is supporting our highest needs students. What it's paying for is actually very focused on the MTSS. So I really, and anyone who knows me and followed my campaign has actually seen my advocacy work. I got into this work through Seattle Council PTSA, and the first thing that I did was get at the state level the issue passed on fully funding basic education with fair revenue. And then founded an organization fighting for full funding for education. This is an issue because it is fundamentally inequitable that we do not have enough funding. I am so supportive of the fact that Seattle Council has passed a new resolution around this, but it is equally as damaging to rip away this community support to supporting schools without providing additional systems and support so that we can support all of these students. So I agree, we need to get moving on how can we increase the equity in the system and how we're funding it. And I know that the district is internally doing a resource mapping project that's going to help us moving forward, and there's my soapbox.
Director Geary.
I will support this. I will say that when I first visited McGilvra, it's in my district, after I was elected, I was impressed even then, their focus on equity. It was even louder and more urgent within that population than I even felt it was in the district at that time, in many ways. They were making a conscious effort around, I remember on tour, in like hiring people of color in their school. That was a point of pride, and the Sherry Jensen on the PTA was part of that, Heidi Obea also. And they were just very proud and very cognizant of the needs and what needed to change in education. And so I know their heart is in this work and always has been. And I have been exposed to environments that weren't that way, weren't talking about it as much. So in that regard, I know that they are trying to create structures to support all of their kids and with a focus on what is needed, the differential needs of the different types of kids within their community. As Director Mack said, you get kids, because we don't provide the kinds of supports to every school that every school should have, you will get students who particularly need those supports that won't get them under the weighted staffing standard. So if you have one student who really, really would benefit from a counselor, if the makeup of that school doesn't support a counselor, they're not going to get a counselor. And who's going to be harmed? The one kid that really needs it. And the disruption creates the stigma because there isn't a support in the school to help that environment. And I've lived through that in my schools as well, that you really need to create the sports. Just because it's one student doesn't mean that one student doesn't need a specially trained person to meet their needs and keep them from falling through the gap. So we can't provide the needs for every student. We can't provide them, every student in every school, the types of adults, nor do we want to create a situation, as we hear, where students have to leave their school to get a support. That's bad too. When we start funneling students because we say we simply can't provide the support in your school because it's just too rich, and so therefore you're not going to get the kinds of supports you need, but we have a school over here that perhaps you want to go to. Because we do that in special ed, and they don't like it. They loathe it. It feels bad. It feels labeling. It feels discriminatory. And so there is a balance. And I just feel like I wish that we could just say what every school should have to support all the kinds of kids in them that could reasonably be foreseen, and do that. We can't do that. We have a city who has said, yes, we want to spend more, and we have a state who said no. And so it's not the hearts of our city that don't want to do more. And so punishing the people of our city for trying to do more is not good. And yes, we need to create a structure. And that, it sounds so easy, but it's a big body of work. And it's going to take somebody who really wants to step up and figure out how to create a structure to take the private funding and create the structures around equitable distribution and analysis of the students' needs. It sounds so easy, and it's going to be so hard. Just like when people said, you really need to look at advanced learning. And I said, that's going to be a multi-year body of work. And it has turned into a multi-year body of work, because it's a body of work that's going to take a lot of input, a lot of careful consideration, policy changes, all of that stuff. So it's not easy, but it's work that needs to be done. But in the meantime, we have Policy 6100, and it encourages our partners, private, governmental, to share money and give us money to use. And so when schools go out and ask for the money to be raised, they're doing it in line with 6100. So we need to, if we're going to honor our policies and let these schools do what they think they need to do to meet the needs of their students, then we have to honor that work until we've come up with the structures that they can do it in a way that is different. And then we can hold them accountable. But right now we have nothing to hold them accountable against. There's no standard to hold them accountable against other than big amorphous words. And that's not fair to the people trying to just get education in an underfunded system.
Director Patu, did you have comments, questions, concerns about this one?
No, I think Director Gary pretty much said pretty much what I'm thinking. I appreciate that.
Okay, I've got questions for CFO Berge and Deputy Nielsen, please. $4 million from PTSA's backfilling on the budget, is that correct? Excuse me, I asked her the question, she told me $4 million last time.
Yeah, I had said that that was an estimate. That's what I recalled. I think that there is some underreporting on the big sheet that goes on because there is some help that comes through that is not captured on there if it's not coming through a grant. So we have talked about some ways to make it more transparent as we move forward, where it has to be separated, taken out of self-help. So right now there's some other things running through self-help that get buried in there, and we can bring those out and be more transparent about what's going on.
Okay, and do you have a sense of how much money is being, how much money is being run through self-help from PTSAs?
I can tell the total amount here on
Aiden, I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the big sheet is what we know and is slightly understated. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I did not bring a big sheet with me.
Okay. And Deputy Nielsen, I recall more than a few conversations on this. It was my understanding there is in fact a policy that prevents PTSAs from buying staff. Is that correct or no?
I'd have to look. I'm sorry, Stephen Nielsen. I don't.
I'm not trying to put you
Yeah,
on the
no,
spot.
it's
I'm
fine.
just trying to check my recollection.
As far as I'm told by Jolynn, no, and no, thank you.
Okay. How do we address the testimony that we've heard, not just tonight, but otherwise, where we've got schools that are raising upwards of $350,000, and we've got some of our highest needs high schools that are lucky if they raise $2,000. And I see it in District 6. I see that wide disparity, and there's been more conversation between those schools. There's been more volunteer assistance between those schools, but we're really not hitting the issue. How do we get there from here?
Well, I will, rather than give a very long answer, I will give what I hope is a short answer. In spite of the fact that the big sheet may not be completely accurate, one thing that it does clearly point out is that we do have a weighted system to provide more funds to higher need students in their higher need schools. So for example, I will, and I'm doing this all from memory, if you look at all of our regular high schools, our regular opportunity high schools, Rainier Beach has the highest funding per student of any of them by a considerable amount. And what that tells you, and that includes all of the funding that is represented on the big sheet, what that tells you is that in spite of the fact that we don't have enough resources to do everything that we want and need to do, we do have a model that does better than what we could do if we just allocated it out in a direct, smoothing fashion, if you will. The other thing that I would say is that the purpose of the levy is to enhance education, not to provide basic education. So in some ways, this is the same subject. We're talking about outside funds, grants in this case from the PTA, that we use to address student needs. I wish I could tell you that I'm confident that the legislature will help us fix this problem. I am not. They do make incremental improvements, but until they do so at a macro level, I believe that we're in a position where, like it or not, we need to look for every resource we possibly can in order to help our students. I hope that answers your question.
It touches it, thank you. And I'm not sure I expect point-to-point answers, and I appreciate that. John Stanford International School and McDonald in the past came to us with extremely high PTSA gifts to hire IAs, etc. And I remember that causing a great deal of consternation years and years in a row. And they went back and changed their delivery system so that their PTSA did not have to ask for that much money. I'm extremely troubled by that, and I take Director DeWolf's words to heart that the responsibility belongs on this dais, but I will suggest to you as well, Director DeWolf, that that is a responsibility shared by staff and the PTSAs and our communities, because we talk a really good game about doing a foundation or pooling money, et cetera, et cetera. All wonderfully controversial topics. We've got big gives as opposed to doing the auction circuit. And that is energy and brilliance that I would much rather have in Olympia than writing checks or begging our community providers for silent auction items, if you will. The other part of this that strikes me is we've got a new superintendent who is busting her backside here, going out, looking for money from the various foundations. And we're doing it for specific asks, for Seattle Super Readers, for the strategic plan, et cetera. And then at the same time, we're turning down money from, who are the robot people? Remind me.
No, we have an update now.
Oh, you have an update?
It's coming.
We don't seem to have a sustainable system given the lack of funding. But we can't be creating private schools within public schools when we've got schools that are hurting and harmed. I'm not going to vote this down, in large part due to the advocacy of my colleague, Director Mack. But I continue to have an ulcer over this issue, and it's not right, and it's embarrassing, and we gotta embrace it and fix it. Other comments, questions, concerns, or can we take the roll? Roll call, please.
Director Burke,
Aye.
Director DeWolf,
Aye.
Director Geary,
Aye.
Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
Number 4, Bex 5, award contract K 5110, bid number B02964 to Shukart Corporation for the Cascade Parent Partnership Program at North Queen Anne High School Roof Replacement Project. This came before OPS May 16th, 4.
Consideration.
Approval of this item would authorize the superintendent to execute construction contract K5110, bid number B02964 with Shukart Corporation in the amount of $2,128,962, including base bid plus alternate number 1 and alternate number 3, plus Washington state sales tax with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract. This bar was updated since introduction. I take it to put numbers in it. Is that correct?
To put numbers and to put some more history about,
As much requested by us. Thank you.
I was reminded, Fred Podesta, Chief Operations Officer, I was reminded by the board that directors were interested in the history of the previous roof replacement. Ironically, we cannot find one. This is a 1914 building. We have no records. District has no records for a comprehensive roof replacement. We've talked to the permitting department and cannot find building permits for a complete roof replacement. We dug into the roof, and there is roof material that appears to be 25 years old or so.
That must make the fire department very happy.
So that tells me the building was leased to Northwest Center for a period of time, and that this was piecemeal work that has been done over the years, but we're at a stage now where we need a new roof.
Thank you. Motion, please, kind sir.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute construction contract K5110, bid number B02964, with Shukart Construction in the amount of $2,128,962, including base bid plus alternate number 1 and alternate number 3, plus Washington state sales tax with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract.
Second.
Questions, comments, concerns? Director Geary, Director Mack, Director DeWolf.
Thank you for the inclusion of the history, and thank you, it was on consent, but I went in and I read the history on the item on consent as well, so I appreciate them both. Thank you very much.
Thank you for reminding us.
Director Mack.
I got to visit Cascade Parent Partnership Program recently, and this building was the Northwest Center Preschool. It was a big contentious issue when they were moved out and the Cascade Parent Partnership was moved in. But it's really exciting work that they're doing at that school, and it'll be a great, they've had some, fresh paint and so forth since they moved in, but this is going to be really helpful for their students.
Director DeWolf?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here. So per state law, we are required to have 15% apprenticeship utilization on contracts over $1 million. Unless there's proof that folks took a good faith effort and couldn't follow that. So my question is, do we have proof that the subcontractors went through a good faith effort process, and or do we have an internal good faith effort process or form or something that illustrates that they've done that process?
We have a waiver form that is part of the contracting process. We are typically, relying on the primes and contract controls to work with both primes and subcontractors. And you'd asked some questions about numbers we're reporting are really based on total project hours. The challenges we have is every trade represented, is every subcontract represented. Some primes and some subcontractors do better on apprenticeships, some less so. So I think as we pursue, as we explore either project labor agreements or community workforce agreements, I think we'll also be looking internally at our own controls and how much we lean in on apprenticeship or any of the social equity programs involved in public works contracting. So we're mostly relying on affidavits and information that's reported to labor and industries. And, those are built into our contracts that you're required to do that from a contract mechanism. We don't do, independent audits and investigations ourselves. It's just not been a practice of the district.
So can you include or at least send the board what that form looks like?
Sure.
And the form as it was filled out for this particular item. Again, I think particularly what I fear is that when we do it by overall project hours, then a lot of those subcontracts do not have to adhere to that, and I think that is my fear, is that we continue to have public dollars go out and not having opportunities for apprenticeship utilization to be a part of those. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Director Burke?
I want to appreciate my colleague for bringing this up because I think it's a really interesting dialogue. And so I'm curious, when we talk about apprenticeship utilization, the expectation that it be, is it an expectation that 15% be across all trades, all subs, or is it legitimate to have that be a rolled up number, recognizing that, maybe some of the smaller subs may have a greater challenge with apprentice labor? I'm not sure. I guess I'm asking.
It's legal.
What's typical?
It's legal for it to be spread across multiple contracts. I think this will be a discussion that we have that, what is our intent? I think understanding the labor market and, perhaps not every contract is the right place because different subcontractors and different firms, there are issues that we need to balance here. So their capacity to run an apprenticeship program might change, but a trade might be well represented by another firm that is better at apprenticeship programs. So I think those are the issues that we'll have to tease out because there'll be the capacity of the contractors and very small firms versus the needs of the various trades. And then the labor market is what it is. I was talking to our trade representatives, our representatives from the trades that came to the executive committee this morning. And they acknowledged that, there are some trades right now where the demand is so high that we're not going to get apprentice hours the way we would like, and some that are different. But that really, I think, is the conversation we have is, well, what are we aiming for? Right now, our standard is really what's legal and in state law, and I would agree. We could lean in a bit more than we do now.
Thank you. Acknowledging that we need to move on with this issue, but if focusing
you.
on granularity and then what
I
others
appreciate
do
that,
for
gentlemen.
benchmarking.
It's 8:25. It's a
you.
time check. We have had a great deal of thoughtful conversation today.
I've had a lot of coffee.
I appreciate that, but we are not staying here until 11:55 tonight. Not even close. So, with that said, roll call, please.
Director Burke,
Aye.
Director DeWolf,
Abstain.
Director Gary,
Aye.
Director Mack,
Aye.
Director Patu,
Aye.
Director Harris.
Aye.
This motion is passed with a vote of 5-0 to 1.
D, intro items. Number 1, approval of the naming of the Rainier Beach School Library, which came before exec May 22 for approval. Approval of this item would approve the naming of the Rainier Beach High School Library located at 8815 Seward Park Avenue, South Seattle, Washington.
So I'm here because I have an administrative role in this, which is why my name is on the bar, but there's such a affection and uniformly across all district staff for Director Patu. We really like our leader, Superintendent Juneau, to speak to this.
Yeah, well, thank you. And we all know, Director Patu, how important you have been to the legacy of this district and the legacy that you will leave. We'll be sad to see you go, but we know that you've put great things in place and that you have been an unwavering, unapologetic advocate for your district time and time again. And so as thoughts swirled around about what should happen upon your exit from Seattle Public Schools School Board, there was a lot of conversation about how this would be a fitting tribute. And so I just want to read the background statement. Betty Patu has served the students of Seattle Public Schools for over 40 years in various leadership positions. Her dedication to young people has made her a pillar of the community and a tireless advocate for educational justice. Ms. Patu's fierce commitment to providing quality education to diverse student groups is demonstrated every time she speaks aloud of her students. There is no question that she sees herself as part of a community to support students as if they were her own children, and that the community sees this in her. Ms. Patu's leadership saw the highest number of students of South Pacific Islander descent graduate from a public school in any one year. Her work influenced the way the district serves and engages students of color. Betty lives her life dedicated to her passion and has raised a family who is also tirelessly devoted to educational justice. Ms. Patu is known and respected for her deep roots in her community and her lifelong pursuit of educational excellence. It is therefore fitting that her legacy be honored by naming the Rainier Beach High School Library for her. Thank you, Director Patu.
Read it again under action, and then we're going to party.
Thank you.
Number 2, approval of the 2019-20 superintendent evaluation documents. This came before exec May 22 for approval. Approval of this item would accept the 2019-20 superintendent evaluation documents as attached to the board action report. Exec committee met. We had an executive session last week before? 2 weeks. It runs together, folks. And we're still drafting the statement that will be attached to it. And, you know, on our worst day, we're still doing better than we used to do. And for that, I thank you. We're still learning to work together. And we still set new goals and aspire higher. And this feels a lot better than it felt 4 years ago. And again, that's due to the hard work of the folks in this building, not just the wall, and the folks here on the dais. And I'm really proud of that. Are we there yet? Most certainly not. Are we going fast enough? Most certainly not. But we got more pockets to pick, and we got to expand our bandwidth and our alignment and collaboration. That said, number 4 and last item. And Ms. Morris, would you come to the dais with Dr. Kenoshita, please? We are on 3?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, that's the evaluation compensation. You want money.
Are we
I thought you were volunteering.
Question. Yeah.
Okay,
Question.
number 3.
Can-
Excuse
we-
me, sir.
Should we wait till action to comment or?
Yes,
Okay.
most definitely. Inappropriate.
Got it.
Thank you. Number 3, approval of the 2019-20 and 2021 performance evaluation compensation criteria for the superintendent. This came before exec May 22 for approval. Approval of this item would accept the superintendent's performance evaluation compensation criteria for 2019-20, 2020-21 school years as attached to the board action report as Exhibit A. Again, we're still working on the documents, and there'll be more to follow in action, and we also need assistant general counsel, is general counsel or chief counsel? Okay. Chief legal counsel. We're working with Mr. Cirqui, who assisted us in getting this contract done and et cetera, for legal advice, because we like to do things properly. Number 4, Gail Morris and Dr. Kenoshita. Tribal History and Culture, Extended Core Instructional Materials Adoption. This came before CNI May 21 for consideration. Approval of this item will waive board policy 2015 while maintaining compliance with state law and approve the Instructional Material Committee's recommendation to adopt tribal history and cultural instructional materials for all K-12 Seattle Public Schools classrooms. Is there a reason this isn't called since time immemorial?
I believe we're using the language of the legislation, but we could easily have used that title.
And that's a reason, thank you. Can you take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about the history here and where we're going and how we're going to get there? Please.
Yes, I will actually just address the essentials of the bar, which is to waive those portions of policy 2015 which relate to procurement and the formation of an adoption committee. Those requirements are not required by state law. However, we are following the state law in regards to submitting the recommendation to the Instructional Materials Committee, which met last week and approved the recommendation to the board. What I would like to do in order to talk about the history is to give the floor to my colleague, Gail Morris, who is much acquainted with the history of since time immemorial here in Seattle Public Schools.
Good evening, Superintendent Juneau and School Board of Directors. Gail Morris, Native American Education Program Manager. So the history, as I know it, do you want to go back to 2003? 2003, 2002, 2003, we met in Quilceda Village with many Native educators and tribal council people around creating a curriculum for non-Native people to understand the tribes here in Washington State. It started out with us just coming together and looking at what can we teach non-Native students about the true history of Native peoples of this land, which evolved into the passing of House Bill 1495, which was suggested that this curriculum be used in Washington State schools. Needless to say, the curriculum wasn't really used by all. So then they moved forward and created Senate Bill 5433 through Senator John McCoy, And that passed in May of 2015 that required the teaching of since time immemorial. We started doing some training. However, we felt very successful in the training that we were doing, but we weren't capturing all of the teachers that needed to take the training to teach this curriculum to all students. And so, as you know, and when you see me present, you see the number of people that have taken the training. While they're great numbers compared to many school districts, for Seattle Public Schools, we could really raise those numbers. This last year, we trained high school teachers. I would say that we captured maybe 1/5 of all high school teachers, which was really disappointing because we did have funding for it, and we had textbooks to give out to the teachers for them to use, and they loved it. We just did training with Chris Drape's team on Monday, and they're excited to start working with teachers around this curriculum as well. So then that raised our numbers up to somewhere close to about 45.
Can you go back and who is Chris Drake's team?
He,
This sounds a little inside baseball for your
I know,
video.
this keeps moving on me, so, oh, there we go. There it is. Chris Drape, he is the, is he a manager? A manager for the consulting teachers formerly known as the Star Mentors. Yes. So we had a great training on Monday with the teachers. We gave out a lot of curriculum. We asked them, because we weren't planning with them because they're not classroom teachers, we asked them how we can support their work in the schools. And we had really great dialogue around that, and we're excited to get moving. And so here we are. We're ready to implement this. We are focused on looking at middle schools next year and some option schools, and really just focusing on how we're going to get the support and have some demo teachers. I mean, we are locked in. We are ready to start this training. We're excited. And I know that many teachers and are excited. One of the biggest requests that we do have is how do we market this and get this out to the buildings? That is something that I would love to have more dialogue on.
I have a couple of questions, if I could, please. And Marquita, please come up to the dais or the podium and assist.
It's always
Okay.
important.
Oh, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Quick question, if I might. Is the STI PD required, and are we paying for it?
Yes.
That is the best news I've heard in freaking forever.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recognize you. I'm sorry. I wish that I could. Okay. Keeping in mind that this is right before adjournment, Director Burke, have at it.
Time is short, right?
Yes.
I'm looking at my colleagues that were on the same election cycle. We were asked by folks, do you support the adoption implementation of since time immemorial? And I can say honestly, as a candidate, I was like, what is it? And it forced me to do some research so I could say, yes, sounds like a great idea. 3 years on Curriculum Instruction Policy Committee, where we went back and forth between saying, yes, let's adopt it, let's figure out how to adopt it, and wow, it's great that we're using it. And so I apologize for the time that this has taken, but I'm grateful to my colleagues and staff that have helped put shoulders to it, continue to provide motivation and reinforcement, and I'm super excited. And thank you for your leadership, all your work, and your team for such a high impact contribution to our district and our students.
Wolf.
Thank you. I just want to elevate too that I think not only in 2015, but even when Eden and I were running too, it was a constant question that we were asked, and obviously we're affirming. And so I'm really grateful that we're moving forward with it. I just encourage you to please let us know what's not working, what you need more from us. I know that we have a really ambitious PD with, I think, 350 to 400 teachers a year. I can imagine that is a lot of work. So please just let the board know if there's anything else you need to make this a reality, and make sure it is across this district, because I think we've wasted, not in a negative way, Rick, we have wasted a lot of time not getting to this moment, which is to be able to really do the important work of accepting this and making sure that we have this in our school. So thank you for all of your work.
Very shy shout out. Thank you for that. And Dr. Kenoshita, your part in this is not unrecognized, and it's kind of a fitting swan song, if you will, especially given your alignment and collaboration with the Tulalip and Senator McCoy. And if we could invite Senator McCoy for the action item, I will never turn down an opportunity to listen to him.
He's on the guest.
God, I love it. It's like magic. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We have an executive session, folks. Don't start clapping yet.